The air in Massachusetts that autumn felt heavier than usual, as if the winds carried the weight of memories too stubborn to fade. Clara Donovan stared through the window of the train as it slowed near Durham Hill, the closest stop to Donovan Manor. Her eyes, once vibrant with curiosity, now held a tired resilience, the kind only grief could carve. She hadn't been back in over a decade. Not since she was a child. Not since her parents moved her to Boston to escape the past, though they never quite explained what that past entailed. Now they were both dead, found lifeless in their study, the coroner citing natural causes, though nothing about the scene had felt natural. Books scattered, a strange symbol burned into the rug, and the locked room upstairs still untouched. The carriage that took her from the station to the estate trembled over cracked dirt roads. Fog curled through the trees like searching fingers, thick and unmoving. The locals didn't wave. Some didn't even look. She noticed a woman on a porch make the sign of the cross as Clara passed. When the iron gates of Donovan Manor came into view, something inside her coiled. The mansion stood as it always had, dark wood walls, towering chimneys, ivy creeping up the stone like veins. The windows reflected nothing. And on the third floor, above the east wing, the one window that had always remained shut, stared back at her. The locked room. Mrs. Kettering, the housekeeper, met her at the door with a trembling curtsy. "Miss Clara, we weren't sure you'd come." "I wasn't sure either," Clara admitted. Her voice, though steady, cracked slightly. "Rooms have been aired, sheets changed. Your mother's things are still as they were." Clara stepped inside. The scent hit her first, old pinewood mothballs, something sour buried beneath. The chandelier above the foyer clicked faintly, as if straining to hold its crystals. Her footsteps echoed down the long corridor lined with portraits. Each ancestor wore the same eyes, cold, watchful. She passed the door. The door. It looked just as she remembered. Heavy oak, black iron knob, a keyhole that hadn't accepted a key in generations. No dust on the handle, no cobwebs on the frame. It had been cleaned, maintained, preserved. Clara paused, her hand brushing the doorknob before pulling away. "I wouldn't," Mrs. Kettering said quietly. "That room, it never wanted to be opened." Later that night, alone in her room, Clara unpacked her few belongings. Her fingers lingered over the leather-bound notebook she found in her mother's study, the one marked only with the letter E. She hadn't opened it yet. Some irrational part of her feared the pages would bleed if cut. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the silence of the manor pressing in. The ticking of the hallway clock grew louder. Then, around midnight, she heard it. A soft thump from upstairs. One, then another. Measured, deliberate. It came from the east wing, from the locked room. Clara sat up, heart drumming. She waited. The sound stopped. Then something else, a whisper, too faint to understand, curling just beneath her name. The next morning she wandered the grounds. The garden had withered into twisted limbs, brambles clawing at the soil. The old fountain in the center dribbled rust-colored water. Near the hedges she found a child's shoe, half buried in mud. It wasn't hers. She returned inside, drawn toward the study where her parents had died. The room smelled of smoke and lavender. Books lay still open. Her father's glasses rested on the desk, folded neatly beside a burned envelope. The rug still bore the sigil, circular, interwoven, charred into the fibers. Clara crouched. Her fingertips hovered above the symbol. It pulsed faintly beneath her touch, though she told herself that was just her imagination. A creak behind her. She turned quickly. Nothing. Just the shadows shifting in the corner. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling she wasn't alone. That evening, at dinner, Mrs. Kettering said, "The manor's been quieter since your return." Clara raised a brow. "Quieter? There were always noises after your mother passed. Things missing, whispers, but last night it stopped." Clara said nothing. Her mind circled the thumps, the whisper, the sigil, and the door. Always the door. She found herself standing before it again after midnight, candle in hand. The air around it was colder. Her breath fogged. She leaned in, pressing her ear to the wood. Nothing. Then, a soft voice, her mother's. "Don't forget who you are, Clara." She stepped back sharply, nearly dropping the candle. The flame flickered violently before stabilizing. The corridor returned to stillness. Clara turned away and walked back to her room, fists clenched, heart unsteady. But as she reached the stairs, she made a silent promise. She would find out what was behind that door. What was locked would be unlocked. The morning light brought no warmth. Mist lingered outside the manor windows, and the halls felt even more hollow than before. Clara stood in the dining room, staring at her untouched breakfast. The silence was unnatural, dense, expectant. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to hesitate before ticking. Mrs. Kettering cleared her throat gently. "Did you sleep well, Miss Clara?" Clara didn't answer. She had heard her mother's voice, she knew she had, but to admit that aloud would unravel the fragile wall she'd built around herself. So she offered a nod and pushed her plate away. Later, as she explored the library, she noticed something peculiar. The servants avoided the east wing entirely. When asked, they mumbled excuses. Leaky pipes are rotting beams, but their eyes betrayed them. Fear, raw and unspoken, lived in their silence. Clara moved through the halls alone, her steps echoing with ghost-like precision. When she passed the locked door again, she found a folded paper tucked beneath the molding. It was old, yellowed and torn, but the writing was unmistakable. "They are watching. The door keeps them out, do not forget. E.D. her mother, Eleanor Donovan." Clara clutched the note and hurried to the study. There she unlocked the bottom drawer of her father's desk and retrieved the leather notebook. She opened it slowly, its spine cracking after years untouched. The first page was clean, the second nearly illegible. The scratching is worse. They whisper at night. Hiram made a promise. I fear he never told me the cost. Clara turned the pages carefully. The entries grew darker, frantic. Eleanor wrote about shapes moving in the walls, dreams where blood poured from her own eyes, a sense of being watched from the inside out. But the most repeated phrase chilled Clara: never unlock the room, never break the line. That afternoon, she walked to the village. The streets were near empty. A few shops were open, but conversation stopped when she entered. Even the grocer offered only clipped greetings. At the edge of the square stood the old church, its bell tower leaning with time. There she saw him for the first time, Walter Reed. He was speaking with the priest, a stack of books under one arm. She approached. "Are you a historian?" Walter turned. He was tall, young, with a weathered look, and a calmness in his eyes that felt oddly out of place in Durham Hill. "I suppose you could say that," he replied. "Family records, church archives, town history. I'm Clara Donovan." He raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You came back." "People seem to think that's strange." "It is," he said plainly. "No one stays long at Donovan Manor." "Not anymore." Clara hesitated, then asked, "Do you know anything about the room on the third floor?" Walter studied her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he handed her one of his books, a local journal from 1887, and walked away. Back at the manor, Clara opened the book. One entry in particular caught her breath. April 4th, 1887. The screaming started again last night. "We saw lights in the east wing. Hiram Donovan insists it's rats, but none of us believe him. Mrs. Ellsworth left this morning without saying goodbye." Clara flipped through more pages. Several mentioned the locked room. One called it the tongue room. Another simply wrote, "May God forgive them all." That night, Clara sat by the fireplace, the diary and journal beside her, the manor whispering in its own language of groans and creaks. She didn't light any lamps. She let the dark settle. Somewhere down the hall, a door shut by itself. She got up slowly, feet cold against the wooden floor. As she approached the east wing, the air grew heavier again, that same sharp chill in her lungs. She paused by the locked room, staring at it. The doorknob was still. Then, a faint tap. 1, 2, 3. Clara's breath caught. Her hand moved involuntarily toward the handle. Another sound, scraping, from inside the walls. It traveled down the corridor, as if something or someone crawled within the manor's bones. She stepped back, retreating, heart racing. In her room, she locked the door. She read more of her mother's diary until sleep overtook her. The final line before the ink stopped mid-sentence read, "They said it was just a room, but it breathes." And it remembers. The morning after the scraping, Clara found the east corridor colder than ever. The walls seemed to draw breath, exhaling a silence that pulsed with weight. She passed the locked door on her way to the study, deliberately ignoring the shadow she thought she saw move beneath it. Back in the library, she resumed reading her mother's diary. The ink had bled in places, as if the paper had wept. Eleanor had written of sleepless nights, of hearing voices speaking in languages she didn't understand, of mirrors showing faces not her own. But always she returned to the room. It was never called anything else, only the room. Clara underlined a line with her finger. It watches. Not from the outside, but through me. The words sank deep into her thoughts. She closed the book and stood, needing air, needing something outside the cold grasp of Donovan walls. She walked into town again, hoping to find Walter Reed. She didn't know what she wanted from him. Answers, maybe, or simply confirmation that she wasn't unraveling alone. She found him inside the archives room of the old town hall, poring over fragile documents by candlelight. He didn't look surprised to see her. "I read the journal," she said without preamble. Walter nodded slowly. "You're not the first to ask about that room, but most stop asking when things begin, changing." "What do you know about it?" Walter gestured to the seat beside him. "Sit. And I'll show you." He laid out several sheets of parchment, family trees, old property deeds, sketches of the manor in its early days. One blueprint from 1870 caught her eye. The original third floor had no room above the east wing. "But it's there," Clara whispered. "Not on paper," Walter said. "It appears only after 1887, the year of the fire." Clara stared at the plans. They blank space, then suddenly a sealed chamber drawn into existence. "I found this too." Walter handed her a newspaper clipping, its edges brittle. "Madness at Donovan Estate. Woman declares child stolen by shadows." The woman in the photograph, sunken eyes, disheveled hair, was her great-aunt Margaret. "She was institutionalized," Walter said. "Claimed she heard her daughter calling from inside the walls." Clara looked away, unsettled. "My mother never spoke of her." "No one does." They walked together back to the manor. Clara, clutching the article in one hand, felt the manor press closer with each step. By the time they reached the front door, the sky had dimmed despite the early hour. Inside, the tension was palpable. Mrs. Kettering greeted them with a hesitant glance. "You've brought company, Miss Clara." "This is Walter Reed," she said simply. Walter removed his hat politely. "I've been studying your family's archives." Mrs. Kettering's smile faltered. "You'll be wanting tea, then?" They sat in the parlor, where the air carried the faint scent of burnt rosemary. Clara watched the fire crackle, but the warmth didn't reach her skin. Walter examined a small silver locket on the mantel. "This was hers," Clara said. "My mother's." He opened it. Inside were two portraits, one of Eleanor as a young woman, the other of a baby with startling grey eyes. "Your sibling?" "No," Clara said. "I'm an only child." Walter didn't press. Instead, he asked, "Have you noticed anything changing? Objects moving, reflections that don't match?" Clara hesitated. Then she said, "I heard her voice, from the locked room." Walter's face hardened. "That's how it starts." She looked up sharply. "What starts?" he answered with care. "It's not just haunting, Clara, it's invitation. The house pulls at your memories, finds your grief, and speaks with familiar voices. It wants to be opened." Clara stood, restless. "Then why not burn it down?" Walter shook his head. "It doesn't burn. They tried in 1887. The fire claimed half the manor, but that room remained untouched." Clara moved to the window. Outside, the trees swayed though there was no wind. "What do I do?" Walter's voice was quiet. You keep reading. You learn everything. But you don't open that door. Not yet. That night, as Clara lit the last candle in her room, she glanced at the mirror. For a moment, her reflection smiled back. Before she did. She didn't scream. Instead, she stepped closer, heart pounding, and watched the reflection match her again. She turned sharply toward the hallway. The scratching had returned, and this time it was not alone. Walter returned the next day with an armful of documents wrapped in cloth and a seriousness that sat heavy on his face. Clara led him into the drawing room, the fire already lit, the curtains drawn tight against the grey afternoon. These came from the rectory archives, he said, laying out the papers. They were sealed until 2 years ago. No one thought to connect them to the Donovans. Clara leaned over the pages, crumbling parchment, some handwritten letters, one brittle photograph. In the picture stood Hiram Donovan, her great-grandfather, beside 3 other men in black robes, faces obscured. "What is this?" she asked, voice low. "The original circle," Walter replied. 4 men, 1 manor, all tied to rituals that predate Christianity. Hiram was obsessed with the idea of transcendence through legacy. Clara scanned the letters. Words like vessel, lineage, pact of tongues appeared over and over. One phrase was underlined 3 times. The door is not a door. It is a seal. Walter pointed to a map. They didn't just build the room, they sealed something in it, something they thought could be bargained with. She shook her head. What does that have to do with me, with my mother? Walter hesitated. Your mother tried to undo it. I think she failed. Clara looked away, her thoughts spinning. And now I'm next. She didn't leave instructions. Only warnings. Walter leaned in. You need to be careful what you let near that room. Later that evening, Clara sat alone in the east corridor. She stared at the locked door, diary in her lap, a candle beside her on the floor. Her mother's entries had grown increasingly erratic. Some were half-finished sentences, others were written in what looked like symbols. She flipped to the most recent dated page. They've promised clarity if I give them just a whisper. I nearly spoke. But then Anna cried. I remembered everything. Clara whispered the name. Anna. She closed the diary. The air grew cold. A thud from behind the door. She didn't move. Another thud, heavier this time. Then a creak, as if the wood had shifted inward, under pressure. Clara stood slowly, her breath clouding. Her hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob, knowing it would not turn. But it did, slightly. A chill ran through her. She pulled back. The knob returned to stillness, as though nothing had happened. The next day, she and Walter sat outside beneath the skeletal branches of a maple tree. Clara spoke first. I think the room knows me. It knows your blood, Walter replied. That's how the pact works. She turned to him. What do you mean? Hiram's writings mention a necessary bloodline, a direct descendant, one who carries the mark. Clara reached into her collar and pulled out the necklace she wore since childhood, a coin-sized pendant with strange engravings. Her mother had given it to her at age 6, told her never to take it off. Walter paled. That's not decorative. That's a seal. Clara's breath caught. Seal for what? To bind you, or protect you. Maybe both. That night, Clara placed the pendant on her nightstand. She stared at it for hours. The metal seemed to hum faintly now, like a tuning fork vibrating in silence. Sometime past midnight, she woke to a sound she couldn't name, half moan, half wind. She rose and opened her door. The corridor was dark. At the far end, beneath the shadowed arch near the locked room, stood a figure, feminine, still. Clara's breath hitched. Mother? The figure tilted its head. Clara stepped forward, then stopped. Something was wrong. The woman's limbs were too long, her posture too sharp, and her mouth too wide. The figure raised one hand and pointed at Clara, and then it whispered in Eleanor's voice, You broke the line. The hallway snapped back to silence. The figure was gone. Clara returned to her room, heart pounding, and collapsed into the chair beside her bed. On her pillow lay the pendant. It had returned to her. Clara didn't sleep. The figure's voice haunted her, the way it spoke not as her mother but through her mother's voice, as if it wore her memory like a mask. Morning arrived unnoticed, and the hours passed in a daze. She didn't eat, didn't read, just sat near the window watching fog roll endlessly over the hills. By dusk, Walter returned, carrying a wooden box. "I found something in the old rectory cellar," he said. "It belonged to Hiram." Inside the box were relics, scraps of old velvet, a rusted chain, several glass vials, and a leather-bound journal far older than the one Clara had from her mother. She opened it carefully. The ink had faded, but the words remained legible enough. March 3rd, 1886. The voice returned last night. "It demands sacrifice, but offers power. We began the first trial." Clara read further, disturbed. "April 19th. Margaret is with child. The line will continue. I must prepare the seal. It will know the child by blood. The door must remain shut until the key is earned." She glanced up. Margaret was his daughter. Walter nodded. "And the child was supposed to carry whatever this thing is." "Host, vessel, protector, hard to say." Clara stood and paced. What if it skipped a generation? What if the bloodline wasn't ready then, but it is now? Walter said nothing. That night, sleep came in fragments. Clara drifted into a restless doze and woke to the sound of a child crying. She sat up, heart hammering. The sound wasn't far. It echoed faintly from the east wing. She lit a candle and left her room. The halls were cold. The crying grew clearer, desperate and uneven, like a child who had been weeping too long. Clara followed it. It led her again to the locked door. But this time, something had changed. The door was ajar. A crack, no more than an inch, but enough. The crying stopped. Clara reached out, hand trembling, and pushed the door open. The candle flickered violently. Inside, the room remained frozen in time, furniture draped in dusty white cloths, a fireplace untouched, the sigil still etched into the floorboards like a scar. Yet now, something sat at the center of the sigil, a small wooden box. Clara stepped inside. The air shifted instantly, thick, like moving through water. She bent down and opened the box. Inside was a key. Old iron with a red silk ribbon tied at the top. Clara touched it. Pain shot through her fingers. She jerked back and looked at her hand. Blood trickled from her palm. Behind her, the door slammed shut. She spun around, the candle extinguished. Darkness, complete and suffocating. Then a voice, not her mother's, not a child's, a voice that sounded like it came from inside her skull. "Welcome home, Clara," she screamed, and woke in bed. Sweat poured down her neck. Her sheets were tangled, her pillow soaked. Her hand ached. She looked at her palm and froze. There, across her skin, was a thin, fresh cut, the same place she'd been burned in the dream. She leapt from bed and searched the floor, the drawers, the entire room. No box, no key. But when she passed the mirror, something caught her eye. Her reflection didn't move. She stepped back slowly, her stomach turning to ice. Then the reflection blinked and smiled. Not her smile, not anymore. Clara didn't tell Walter about the dream, not the crying, not the key, not the cut that hadn't faded. She feared speaking it aloud might make it real, or worse, open something that couldn't be closed again. But the fear didn't stop her. That afternoon, she returned to the east wing. The door remained locked, the sigil on the floor still visible through the narrow gap at the base. No sign of the key or the box, no proof of anything. Yet her hand still bore the wound, and her reflection still moved with unnatural delay. Driven by something between obsession and inheritance, Clara descended to the manor's basement. Dust coated everything, broken furniture, empty crates, forgotten relics. She found an old trunk beneath a tarp and pried it open. Inside, she discovered a stack of letters bundled in twine. They were addressed to Hiram Donovan and signed by a man named Thorne Whitaker, dated between 1885 and 1888. She opened one. "Hiram, the room is stable, but the voices grow more confident. We cannot delay the ritual again. The vessel must be prepared. You have delayed this long enough. Clara read every word. Thorne's letters referenced blood rites, containment circles, ancient languages spoken backward, and in each there was the same warning. The seal must be maintained through memory, through fear, through silence. One phrase repeated, "It must never be forgotten or it will remember itself." Clara gathered the letters and returned upstairs. That evening she sat before the locked room. The air was still but electric. She held her mother's diary in one hand and the pendant in the other. For the first time she said aloud, "I am not afraid of you." The pendant grew warm. She reached into her pocket and removed the key. It hadn't been there before, not when she dressed, not when she searched. But now it was. She stared at it, unwilling to ask how. Slowly, she placed the key into the lock. It fit. It turned. The door creaked open. Inside, the air was thick with stillness. The room hadn't changed in decades. Furniture frozen beneath white sheets, an untouched vanity near the corner, a portrait above the fireplace covered in cloth. Clara stepped inside. The sigil on the floor was clear, burned into the wood. She knelt beside it. The symbols matched the ones from her mother's diary. As she traced them with her fingers, a sudden wave of memories hit her. She was 6 years old. Running through the corridor, her mother screaming, the door slamming shut, her father whispering, "She must never remember." The memory faded. Clara looked up, heart pounding. She walked to the vanity and removed the cloth. A cracked mirror stared back. Her reflection blinked, once, twice. Then it tilted its head. Not her. Clara backed away and turned toward the fireplace. She reached up and pulled the cloth from the portrait. It was her mother, but younger, and afraid. In the painting, Eleanor held a baby in her arms, not Clara, a different child. Clara stared, realization dawning slowly. A sister. One never spoken of, one never mentioned. The pendant around her neck burned suddenly, a searing heat that dropped her to her knees. She yanked it off and threw it across the room. The floor groaned beneath her. From within the sigil, a sound began to rise, low, guttural, rhythmic, like breathing. She scrambled to her feet and ran from the room, slamming the door shut behind her. The key dropped from her hand. It turned itself and locked. The next morning, Clara didn't leave her room. Her hands trembled as she reread her mother's diary, eyes scanning for anything about a sibling. But there was nothing. No mention of another child, no birth, no death. Only the painting, etched now in her memory of Eleanor holding an infant with the same eyes Clara saw every time she looked in the mirror. She called Walter. When he arrived, she handed him the torn pendant, still scorched from the heat. "It reacted," she said, "when I entered the room." Walter's face darkened. "Then the seal recognized you." Clara nodded slowly, and I remembered something. A girl, a baby. I wasn't alone when I was little. I think I had a sister. Walter took a breath. "There's something I didn't show you. I wasn't sure it mattered, until now." From his satchel, he pulled a leather portfolio and laid out several handwritten pages. They were written in an elegant but archaic script, Hiram Donovan's hand. One page bore the title, "Of Binding and Blood, the Pact of Tongues." Clara read aloud, "One may not breach the threshold without offering lineage. The child must see, the child must forget. In memory, it awakens. In silence, it sleeps." Walter explained, Hiram believed that a bloodline could carry memory through generations, not just personal memory, but something deeper. An echo of agreements made with forces we barely understand. Clara closed her eyes. "And if we remember, it awakens." Walter nodded. "Exactly. Which is why your mother likely erased your memories. But she must have failed. Or something's changed." Clara clenched her fists. "I didn't choose this." "No," Walter said. "But you're part of it. And now it's responding to you." Clara stood. "Then it's time we stop responding. We fight." Walter opened another envelope. Inside was a photograph of 4 men, The same one Clara had seen before, but this time annotated. Beside Hiram's name was a symbol, a twisted spiral, and beside another man's, Thorne Whitaker. This man, Walter said, pointing. He was a scholar of pre-Christian theology. He died in 1888. Same week as the fire. Clara stared at the date. That wasn't a coincidence. No, it was the ritual's failure. Something went wrong. The room was meant to contain whatever was summoned. Instead, it became part of the house. Walter opened one last document, an inventory of Hiram's possessions after his death. Listed among the items was a locked cabinet containing linguistic texts of unnatural dialects, and one phrase noted in Latin, vox intra, memoria foris. The voice within, the memory beyond. Clara shivered. So if I remember too much, you become the door, Walter finished, or worse, the key. That night, Clara couldn't sit still. The house felt tighter, the halls longer. Her reflection followed too closely, her dreams sharper. She wandered into the drawing room and found herself staring at a portrait of Hiram. He looked stern, but beneath the oil paint, something seemed to shimmer, almost like a second image beneath the first, a hidden layer. She leaned in. For a heartbeat, Hiram blinked. Clara stumbled back, heart pounding. She turned away and found a small slip of paper tucked between the books on the mantel. It was another letter, written in Eleanor's hand. I tried to unbind it, but the bloodline holds. It does not want you. It wants her. But she is gone. I had to send her away. Clara, forgive me. I broke the line to save you. Clara's chest tightened. A rush of heat flooded her head. The baby in the portrait. The cries. The second child. Her name, Clara whispered. Anna. She said it again. The lights flickered, and from the east wing, the door creaked. Not open, just acknowledgement. Clara no longer trusted the mirrors. They moved even when she didn't. Sometimes her reflection turned its head a fraction too late. Other times it smiled when she didn't. The more she watched, the more the glass seemed to blur, like it held something trying to surface. She covered every mirror in the manor with linen. The house seemed to breathe easier without them. Walter returned 2 days later, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. He carried no books this time, only silence. Clara offered him tea, but he declined. You've been researching, she said. I can see it on your face. Walter nodded. I found something, a ritual meant to reverse a binding, but it's not complete. Some pages were torn. It needs specific elements, location, time, blood, memory. Clara's voice was steady. Do you think it would work? I don't know, he said, but we might not have another choice. They spoke little more that evening. Walter paced the drawing room while Clara read from her mother's journal again, now understanding more than before. Eleanor had tried the ritual. She'd gathered the pieces, but something had stopped her. Fear, loss, or maybe the knowledge that the house would never let go once it truly awakened. That night, Clara heard her name whispered again. Not just once, but repeatedly. A chorus of voices murmuring just beneath the floorboards. She stepped into the east corridor. The door was open, not fully, but enough to reveal the edge of the sigil glowing faintly on the wood floor. Clara approached. Inside, the air vibrated. Shadows slid across the walls. Something unseen exhaled. She didn't enter, but the pendant, long scorched and hidden in a drawer, was now around her neck. She hadn't put it on. She slammed the door shut and locked it. The next day she found Walter in the study poring over the ritual notes. There's something else, he said without looking up. A fifth element. I missed it before. Clara waited. He looked at her. It needs betrayal, willingly given. The word sat between them like a blade. Later, Clara wandered the halls. Every corner felt wrong. The manor's angles twisted slightly, its staircases steeper, its halls longer. She opened a linen closet and found a staircase behind it, one that hadn't been there before. She descended cautiously. The stairs led to a chamber beneath the cellar. Dust choked the air, but the space had been used recently. Candles lined the walls, all melted at once. In the center was a circle of ash. Anne scrawled across the far wall in something darker than ink. She was not enough. Clara stumbled back. Something laughed in the dark. When she turned to flee, the passage was gone. Only brick. She ran her hands across it, heart pounding. Then a voice behind her. "Clara!" She spun. Walter stood behind her, pale, eyes distant. "How did you—" "I followed you. But I didn't hear you. I didn't walk," he said. Her blood ran cold. "Walter," she said carefully, "what's the fifth element again?" He smiled. "You." She stepped back. He blinked. Confusion flashed across his face, followed by horror. "No, I didn't mean to say that. I don't—" "Clara, something's wrong." The candles relit themselves. Walter collapsed. Clara dragged him upstairs with difficulty. He came to on the floor of the study, clutching his head. "I heard them," he whispered. "Inside me. They're in the house, in us. They're using our words." Clara nodded, her voice barely audible. "Then we're running out of time." And from upstairs the locked door slammed open. The wind had stopped. The trees outside the manor stood motionless, like they too were listening. Clara climbed the stairs toward the east wing, the echo of the door slamming still ringing in her ears. Walter followed, slower now, one hand gripping the banister for balance. He looked pale, drained. The door to the room stood wide open. No air moved through the corridor, yet every candle along the walls had extinguished itself. Only the sigil glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. Clara stepped inside. The room had changed. Where once it held only the sigil and draped furniture, now it revealed a second door, small, almost hidden, low to the ground behind the fireplace. It hadn't been there before. She crouched, reaching toward the handle. It was cold, and when she touched it, her ears rang with a high-pitched sound, sharp and unnatural. She gritted her teeth and pulled. It opened. Behind the narrow passage was another room, untouched by time. Dust clung to the ceiling in thick sheets, but the air was warmer. Clara stepped inside and froze. It was a nursery. A cradle stood at the center. Toys lay scattered, a wooden horse, a spinning top, a broken doll. A mobile above the cradle turned slowly, though no wind stirred. On the walls, faded drawings in childlike crayon, stick figures, a house, a name scribbled over and over. "Anna!" Clara moved toward the cradle. Empty. But a soft sob echoed behind her. She turned. No one. She stepped back, and her foot brushed something beneath the rug. She knelt and lifted the edge. A floorboard was loose. Inside the hollow was a second key, smaller, older, rusted. Tied to it was a ribbon of red silk, stained brown with age. Attached was a tag, handwritten, "For her. When she's ready." Clara held it in shaking fingers. "It was meant for Anna," she whispered. Walter stepped into the nursery. "This room, it shouldn't exist." "I think it's where they kept her," Clara said. "Hidden, forgotten. My mother must have locked it away after everything failed." Walter looked around slowly. She wasn't just hiding the room. She was hiding Anna from the house. The sobbing returned, closer now, raw and childlike. Clara looked toward the mirror hanging above the small dresser. This time her reflection was not alone. A little girl stood beside her, pale, long black hair, eyes too wide, tears down her cheeks. Anna. Clara turned quickly, nothing behind her, but the sobbing didn't stop. It echoed through the walls, down into the floorboards, across the room like the entire nursery was weeping. Clara placed the key in her pocket and whispered, "I remember you." The sobbing stopped, and from beneath the cradle a voice said, "Then it remembers you too." The walls groaned. The sigil in the next room flared brighter. The air pulsed once, twice, then stilled. Clara stood, heart thundering. "We need to finish this." Walter looked toward the passage. "Whatever the second key unlocks, it's not just another door." "No," Clara said, "it's a choice." Clara sat in silence, the second key resting in her palm. The metal was cold, rough with age, but beneath it pulsed something deeper, an urgency, a weight. Walter watched her from across the room, expression unreadable. Neither spoke for a long while. Finally, he broke the stillness. "So you saw her, didn't you?" Clara nodded. "She's trapped in the nursery. Her name is Anna." Walter exhaled, slow and quiet. "Then your mother failed more completely than she realized." "She didn't fail," Clara said. "She chose to sacrifice Anna to protect me. She erased her existence from the house, from history, from me." "And the house never let go," Walter murmured. "It's been waiting." Feeding off the fracture, Clara rose and paced. "The second key wasn't meant for me, but I remembered, and that's what matters. I carry the memory now. That gives me access." "Or makes you vulnerable," Walter said. "There's something else." Clara turned. Walter pulled a weathered folder from his satchel and opened it to reveal a document stamped with the Donovan family seal. "I found this in the Whitaker archives, a first-hand account from your grandfather, Elias Donovan. Not Hiram, Elias." Clara frowned. "I thought he disappeared." "He did," Walter replied. "But before that, he wrote this, read it." Clara took the parchment. The handwriting was sharp and hurried. "The child speaks to them, through the walls, through the shadows. Hiram believed power could be bargained. But power never bargains. It only demands. I tried to stop it. I sealed the second gate, but she was already marked. And Eleanor thought she could unbind it through love. She was wrong. Memory is the cage. And Clara will remember it all." Clara's blood turned to ice. "He named me," she whispered. Walter stepped closer. He knew the cycle would come back around, that you would return, that the house would call. Clara's mind reeled. The sigils, the keys, the rooms, none of it was meant to keep the evil out. It was to keep us in. "Exactly," Walter said. "Containment through lineage. The curse isn't just a haunting, it's a system, ritual, architecture built on memory, passed down in blood. And now all of it is waking." Clara tightened her grip on the key. "Then I need to finish what they couldn't." Walter didn't move. "There's more, the ritual, Hiram's original ceremony. It was never meant to imprison something. It was meant to merge with it." She turned slowly. "Merge?" Walter nodded. He believed the entity wasn't a demon or ghost, but a consciousness, something vast and ancient. He wanted to become its vessel, to live forever. Clara stepped back. "So that's what the room is." "A gateway," Walter said, "and the vessel has to choose." Clara's thoughts spiraled. "If I open that second door, what happens?" "I don't know," Walter admitted. "But I think the house does." They stared at each other, the silence between them now too full to bear. Clara turned away, whispering, "I don't want to be a vessel." "You don't have to be," Walter said. She looked at him. "But someone does." Walter's eyes held hers. He said nothing. That night, Clara entered the nursery again, the second key warm in her hand. She stood before the wall, solid, ordinary, yet she knew it would open. It always had, once the house was ready. She placed the key into a small notch beneath the cradle. The floor groaned, and the wall split open. Behind it, stairs descending into earth deeper than the foundation, unlit, unwelcoming. She looked back once, then stepped into the dark. The stairs descended far deeper than any foundation should allow. With each step, the air grew denser, thicker, filled with a scent Clara couldn't name, metallic, earthy, and ancient. Her lantern flickered in protest, but she pressed forward, the second key clutched tight in her fist. At the bottom, a circular chamber waited, stone walls carved with sigils identical to those from Hiram's journals. In the center, a shallow basin filled with stagnant black water. Around it, remnants of candles, chalk lines, and offerings long rotted. But the circle itself remained unbroken. She stepped forward. The moment her foot crossed the edge, a wind surged upward. The water rippled, and from the walls, voices emerged, not whispered, but chanting in a language that struck something deep within her bones. Clara closed her eyes and began reciting the reversal Walter had helped translate. The Latin was rough on her tongue, foreign, but familiar in some twisted way. Memoria solvitur. Sanguis redimit, vocem claudo, vinculum frango. Again, louder. The air howled, and behind her, footsteps echoed. Walter. He entered slowly, eyes wide, mouth parting as he took in the chamber. It's all real. Clara didn't answer. She drew a knife, old and ceremonial, found in the attic among her mother's hidden things, and pressed it to her palm. Blood hit the basin. The chant stopped. The water turned red. A crack split the stone beneath them. Walter stepped back. "What now?" Clara raised her voice. "We finish it." But the house didn't agree. The sigils on the wall glowed. A tremor passed through the floor, and from the basin something began to rise. Not a creature, a presence, a form that flickered and pulsed, shifting between light and shadow, faces and flame. It spoke without sound, directly into her thoughts. "You remember." Clara trembled but held her ground. "I reject the pact." The entity surged, pressing into her mind, showing her visions. Anna in the cradle, screaming. Eleanor bleeding at the base of the stairs, Hiram's face hollow and burning, whispering, "Legacy is survival." The circle cracked wider. Clara fell to her knees. Walter grabbed her arm. "We have to complete the break." Clara stared at him, eyes wide. "There's only one way." Walter hesitated. Then he understood. Betrayal, willingly given. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Walter nodded once. She drove the blade into his side. He gasped but didn't scream. The basin erupted. Light burst from the cracks, blinding and silent. The chamber shook violently. The voices screamed, not in rage but in loss. The circle broke. Clara cradled Walter as the glow faded. He looked at her, eyes dimming. "You did it." "I remember," she whispered, tears falling. "All of it." He smiled faintly. "Then you've already won." And he was gone. The chamber grew still. The walls faded, and Clara was alone. Clara emerged from the chamber before dawn. Her clothes were torn, skin stained with dust and blood, Walter's lifeless words still echoing in her mind. Above, the manor had changed. The walls creaked as if exhaling after centuries of tension. Lamps flickered dimly. Portraits had fallen from the walls. The door to the east wing was open again. She walked through the halls with measured steps. The air was still thick, charged, but the oppressive weight had lifted slightly, as if the house no longer held its breath, but waited for one final act. The sky outside turned deep red. Clara remembered the journal, one of Hiram's most cryptic entries. "When the moon bleeds, the pact must be fulfilled, or the gate will consume the line." She stood before the locked room again. This time the key turned easily. Inside, the sigil had cracked in two. The furniture was gone. Only the fireplace remained, and above it, the portrait of Eleanor, untouched. Clara walked toward it and placed her palm against the frame. "I know why you did it," she whispered, "but I'm ending it." From the hearth, flames roared to life, blood red, unnatural. In them, faces swirled. Hiram's, Eleanor's, Anna's, and her own. They spoke in unison, not aloud but in her bones. "Blood remembers." Clara removed the pendant from her neck and held it over the fire. The metal vibrated violently, resisting. Then it shattered. The room screamed. Walls shook. Glass exploded outward. The sigil flared one final time and then split completely, releasing a shockwave that blew Clara backward. She landed hard, vision swimming. The flames vanished. The portrait fell and cracked, and the room grew still. But the silence was not peace. From the ashes, a figure began to rise. It was not human, not fully. It bore traces of Eleanor's face, Anna's crying eyes, and something darker behind them all. A shadow stitched from memory and bloodline. The entity stepped forward. Clara crawled backward, her breath short. "I broke the circle," she gasped. "I gave the blood, you're done." It smiled, something that should not smile. No, it whispered. You're open. The walls began to dissolve. Not rot, not collapse. Dissolve, as if the house no longer needed to exist in this shape. The entity raised one hand, and Walter appeared. His form hovered, pale and fading, still clutching his side. Clara reached for him, desperate. He looked down at her, sadness in his eyes. Then he nodded. A burst of light exploded from his chest. The entity reeled. Clara screamed and stood. She seized the ritual blade and drove it into the floor, into the final point of the sigil. Light surged again. The manor shook to its foundations. And the entity fractured, split into threads of smoke and ash, which scattered to the corners of the room and vanished. Then, silence. Not empty. Final. Clara stood in the center of the broken sigil, alone, the blade buried in wood, the portrait burned to ash. The moon faded to silver. The house was still. Morning light crept through the broken windows of Donovan Manor, gentle and indifferent. The storm had passed. The blood moon had vanished, and all that remained was silence. Clara wandered through the debris. The manor was no longer alive with whispers or shifting walls. It was a carcass, hollow and spent. Dust floated lazily in the still air, and the scent of ash clung to every surface. Her footsteps echoed too loudly now. Where once she had heard her mother's voice, now there was only absence. She returned to the east wing. The door to the room had fallen from its hinges. The sigil had burned itself into the floor one last time before vanishing completely. In its place, only scorched wood and a faint warmth that pulsed with dying breath. Clara knelt, placing her palm against the floor. Nothing answered. No whisper. No breath, no presence. And yet something lingered, not malevolent, but watchful. She stood and walked to the nursery. The cradle was overturned, the toys scattered. The hidden passage was sealed again, as if it had never been carved. A single sheet of paper fluttered on the dresser. She picked it up. It was a page from her mother's diary, words barely legible, but clearly meant for her. If you are reading this, then the house has let you go. It means you chose memory over silence. That was always the only way. I'm sorry for the weight I gave you, but I trust what you've become. Clara pressed the paper to her chest. She wept for the first time, not out of fear but out of grief, for Eleanor, for Anna, for Walter, for herself. Later she stood at the edge of the garden, what was left of it. The hedges had collapsed, the fountain dry and cracked, and yet, beneath the ruins, wild flowers had begun to bloom. Tiny, fragile, alive. That afternoon, Clara sealed the east wing. She boarded the doors and nailed shut the remaining windows. She painted over the cracked walls. She placed Walter's journal in the library, alongside Hiram's and Eleanor's. She cleaned the blood from the floor. She didn't light candles anymore. The darkness didn't press the same way. It watched, but it no longer reached. In the mirror, her reflection followed her exactly. It blinked when she blinked. It smiled only when she did, but her eyes had changed. In the corner of the iris, barely visible unless one looked too long, a faint white ring circled her pupil. A reminder, a trace, a mark. She wore it without fear. That night, Clara stood by the fireplace. She held the last remnant of the pendant, now nothing more than a charred disk of metal. She dropped it into the flames and watched it melt into nothing. She didn't dream. She didn't need to. The house no longer spoke, and neither did the past. Months passed. The village of Durham Hill watched in quiet confusion as Clara Donovan began the slow work of reclaiming her family's estate. Roof tiles were replaced, rotten floorboards pulled up and burned, windows were cleaned and reglassed. But the east wing remained sealed, untouched, its door hidden behind plaster and paint. She spoke little of what had happened. People respected that. Mrs. Kettering never returned, and the rest of the staff faded like breath on glass. The manor became Clara's alone, no longer haunted, but still very much alive. She heard it sometimes, the faint creak of beams settling, the wind curling along the chimneys, the rustle of ivy against stone. But none of it whispered. It watched now with curiosity, not hunger. She grew used to the silence. She found solace in it. In town, Clara took up work at the library. She began compiling the family's true history, Hiram's writings, Eleanor's diaries, even her own notes and memories. She named the project the Donovan Reckoning, but didn't publish it. It wasn't meant for the public. It was meant for whoever came next. One evening, she stood before the manor's gates, a satchel over her shoulder, her eyes fixed on the windows. Most of them remained dark. Only the light above the grand staircase remained on, steady, unwavering. She stepped through the threshold and exhaled. The silence greeted her, not empty, simply calm. She wandered through the halls, touching the smooth banister, the polished handles, the newly hung curtains. Everything felt clean, but honest. Nothing was hidden anymore. Nothing whispered behind the walls. She paused near the east wing. The wall was whole, white, still. She placed her hand against it and closed her eyes. No voice, no vibration, just the subtle warmth of memory. The next morning, Clara packed her things. Not everything, just what she needed. She left the rest behind. The manor didn't feel like a prison anymore, but it wasn't home either. It was a chapter, and it was closed. She locked the front door, not to seal anything in, but because the past no longer belonged to the present. As she walked into town, she passed a boy playing near the woods. He waved. She waved back. In his hand he held a toy horse, old, wooden, the same style that had once sat in the nursery. Clara stopped, crouched down. "Where'd you find that?" she asked. The boy smiled. "By the rocks." There was a box. Her heart clenched, but she smiled. "It's very special." The boy nodded proudly and ran off. Clara stood still for a moment, watching him disappear into the trees. Then she kept walking, back into silence. Autumn 1973. The leaves were dry and brittle beneath the boy's sneakers. His name was Caleb, and he had wandered farther than he was supposed to, past the overgrown stone fence, through the trees that whispered when the wind was still, toward the ruins that the older kids dared each other to enter. He stopped near what remained of Donovan Manor. There wasn't much left, just fragments of the East Wing's foundation, vines consuming what once had been windows, a staircase leading to nowhere. The rest had long since caved in, burned out, or been taken by weather and time. The town barely spoke of it anymore. But Caleb liked quiet places, and he liked finding things. He crouched near a crumbled wall and noticed a glint of metal beneath the dirt. With small, curious hands, he dug gently and pulled out an old key, iron worn smooth with age, tied with a strip of red ribbon. The ribbon crumbled in his fingers, but the key remained solid, cool to the touch. He turned it over, admiring the weight of it. Then something else caught his eye, a coin-sized medallion, half buried in moss. He picked it up. Its surface was scorched black, edges cracked, but an engraving remained faintly visible, a circle bound by lines, symbols curling within. Caleb smiled. His mother's voice echoed faintly through the woods. "Caleb, supper." He pocketed the key and ran. Behind him, the last window of the manor caught the dying light of day and shimmered, just for a second. Then it darkened once more. Far away in a quiet village library, an old file sat untouched on the highest shelf, the Donovan Reckoning. Its pages yellowed, its ink faded, but within it lived every truth, every name, every warning. Inside the final page, a single handwritten note remained. "If the house ever breathes again, remember what silence cost us. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching." If you enjoyed this story and want more haunting tales like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There's so much more to discover, and you won't want to miss what's next. And before you go, click on the video that's now on your screen. A mystery that dives even deeper into forgotten places and hidden histories. We'll see you there.